started from the beginning, with all the people who knew him, his private secretaries, his staff, the colonels, etc. Everybody who actually worked in the same room as him.
And your conclusion is that Hitler was very clever? I think you said that.
He was a brilliant strategist. He fought off the whole of the world, the entire armies of the world. He fought them off for 6 years, which is something George Bush didn't manage to do even in Iraq. So you have to, I mean, I think that at the end of the day, General Jodl, who was his chief strategist, was asked exactly the question: was Hitler a clever general? And Jodl says,
he was a clever general, but he's the worst. He's looked upon as the worst killer of the 20th century, and your project seems to be to rehabilitate him.
Yes, not to rehabilitate, but to stone clean him.
Stone clean.
There's a subtle difference. It's not whitewashing, it's stone cleaning. So much muck has been thrown at the name of Adolf Hitler that I come along with my bucket and sponge and I want to see what actually happened. Okay, he was a criminal. His private secretary, Christa Schroeder, said, Mr. Irving, he could be very cruel. And she gave me some certain examples. Another person who was with him, with Hitler, he said, I remember when Himmler came into the room, the chief of the SS, and Hitler sat on the edge of the table and saying, yes, liquidate the prisoners in Buchenwald. Don't let them fall into the American hands. I won the trust of Hitler's staff when I wrote my biography. And
you won the trust of Hitler's staff?
Yes, they trusted me with their private papers and diaries and with what actually happened.
Yes, and you said that Hitler ordained you to write his biography.
Yes.
How can he?
Not even actually say David Irving. What he said to his doctor at the beginning of September 1944, and the doctor wrote it down in his diary, which he gave me. He said, you know, since 1942, I've had all my conferences taken down in shorthand. And perhaps one day a British historian will come along and write my biography. But he can't be a modern historian. He's going to have to be a historian of the next generation. And one who speaks fluent German, and one who's familiar with all the country's archives.
And that was...
So when I telephoned this doctor and I said, Dr. Giesinger, can I come and interview you about writing the biography of Hitler? He said, Irving, I've been expecting you. Of course, my rivals hate this because it didn't happen to them.
Did Hitler have a plan to exterminate the Jews?
I don't think so. Repeatedly, when we look at original documents, genuine documents, we see Hitler stretching out his hand to stop nasty things happening to them. I'll give you one example. In April 1942, the chief of the German civil service visits the Minister of Justice. And afterwards, the Minister of Justice says, Dr. Lammers, the chief of the civil service, tells me that Hitler, the Führer, has repeatedly said he wants the final solution of the Jewish problem delayed until after the war is over.
Yeah. So what you're basically saying here is that Hitler is misunderstood. He was a clever man.
I love the word he used.
He was the Jews' best friend. He didn't know anything about the gas chambers. And all this, how likely is it that the man on the top didn't know anything about all these things?
Put it the other way around. There's no evidence that he did know. It's not quite the same thing. I'm quite happy if you come along now 10 years' time, if I'm still around, and you say, Mr. Irving, I found the document. Yeah, you're wrong. And I say, thank goodness, at last the rat race is over, I can just watch TV in the evening.
So but there is no document. You've done just the same, because you say, I looked through all the documents. Yes. I can't find any evidence that Hitler had a plan to exterminate the Jews.
So you couldn't hang him.
So that is the proof that he didn't know.
Well, in England we've always had this principle that a man is innocent until proven guilty, even Adolf Hitler. And unfortunately historians tend to forget that, and they say, oh well, who needs proof? His name is Hitler, hang him.
But I mean, how likely?
If you're a historian, you've got to have better criteria.
If you didn't know anything about Hitler, you heard about him, but you were not a historian, and someone came along and said that this man on the top, he was not responsible for killing 6 million Jews, because he didn't know.
He was responsible because he was head of state. Constitutionally responsible, the buck stops here. But for me, if I'm writing a book about the rise and fall of the Third Reich, then Hitler was responsible, what the hell? But if I'm writing a book about Adolf Hitler, the man, and the evidence appears to point out to the fact that people were doing things in his name without him knowing, which is what I think happened, then you've got to find out and write it.
So you have to get into the archives and say, there's not a single paper where it's written that Hitler was responsible, he knew. So the conclusion is that he didn't know. Of course he knew. He was the man on the top. He knew what the people under him were doing.
This is the Hollywood image of Hitler, the omnipotent, omniscient Adolf Hitler. He wasn't. His breath smelt, his teeth were falling out. He was an unpleasant man in many ways. The staff adored him. But he wasn't the omnipotent. He wasn't the Hollywood Madison Avenue version of Hitler. I very soon found out when I began discussing him with his staff, all of whom were educated people, that there were two Hitlers. There was the Madison Avenue Hitler, the published edition of Hitler, and there was the real Hitler that these people had been working for.
You had a daughter?
Yeah.
Josephine. Let's talk. Yes, but let's talk about your eldest daughter, I believe, Josephine.
Or Josephine,
yes. What happened to her?
She was schizophrenic. Very, very sad. She suffered schizophrenia for 18 years from her teenage years, and then when she was aged about 35, she killed herself. And I know what you're going to say. You're going to say that under the Nazis, they would have liquidated her.
She would have been a medical misfit
yes.
to the Nazis.
Yes.
And they would have liquidated.
Yes.
Yes.
And my opponents, when Josephine killed herself at the end of the funeral, my opponents sent a big wreath round. Big wreath of white lilies and white roses with a little card attached, saying she had it coming to her. Effectively, it was written in camouflage language. It was the actual words were truly a merciful death, which is merciful death, Gnaden Tod, was the German code word for euthanasia.
But stonewashing, as you say, Hitler.
Yes.
Knowing that his theories and the practice was to kill people like your daughter, doesn't that hurt?
Even there, you've got to distance yourself from your own family tragedy. And an American a few days ago, he sent me an extraordinary photograph of Adolf Hitler, which he had signed to a cripple. And this girl had sent Adolf Hitler a poem, which she had written, and it was a poem about her life as a cripple in Germany in 1937. And Hitler was so moved by this poem that he sent her one of his most magnificent photographs, personally signed by him to her by name.
So Hitler had feelings. What a surprise.
Unquestionably, yes. Yes, but you won't believe that if you read the books about Adolf Hitler by other authors. But you need to know the truth, because World War II was an appalling tragedy. That was the Holocaust. And to stop these things happening, you can't go into it with a political bent. You've got to try and find out what actually happened and why.
David Irving, thank you very much for coming.
Thank you for letting me speak.
Ja, dette intervjuet ble gjort i opptak tidligere i dag. Nå vi direkte fra Tabloid Studio, og de siste minutter skal du få vite mer om David Irving. Og Lars Svensson, aller først, når du hørt på dette intervjuet med Irving, hva din reaksjon på måten han fremstiller seg selv på?
Altså, jeg vil jo si at dette typisk Irving. Altså, han kunnskapsrik og grunnleggende pålitelig. Altså, han kan utvilsomt veldig mye, men han også et eksempel på en veldig ideologistyrt måte å skrive historie på, når han fremstiller det som om her jeg så utelukkende går til kildene, her kommer det ikke noe politisk ideologi imellom, så det omtrent så langt unna som man kan komme. Så det vil være min umiddelbare reaksjon.
Ja, det en historiker som veldig ensidig. Altså, av og til så strøfer han borti ting som riktige, blant annet sier han ting om Norge, hvor vi kan ha godt av å høre det. Så han så enormt ensidig på andre måter, og så han litt konspirativ. Altså dette med at i den rettssaken som var mot han, og hvor han tappte, og hvor kjente historikere gikk skarpt imot han, så liksom blir det hele til at alle vittnene betalt, millioner av kroner utbetalt til vittner, og så hele rettssaken falsk. Og det tror ikke jeg om det britiske rettssystemet, at hele den rettssaken falsk. Og der synes jeg man ser liksom en slags konspirativ side ved ham, som gjør at man ikke kan feste tillit til ham.
Jeg har jo lest at også hans kritikere sier at han en dyktig mann til å grave i kjeldemateriale og finne ting. Men konklusjonen blir feil.
Altså, det han utvilsomt. Altså, han har en enorm oversikt over kildematerialet. Nå jo ikke jeg faghistoriker, så jeg går jo ikke ned i det samme kildematerialet som han går ned i. Og problemet mitt da, som jo oppriktig opptatt av denne historiske perioden, at jeg kan jo ikke stole på det han skriver om dette kildematerialet. Og jeg vil jo si at i denne rettssaken, denne Penguin-rettssaken, som han tappte så det suste, så ble det jo dokumentert veldig